Let's see what else is happening with Jane. Oh man. Um, we left off with Jane in this cold gray house. The Mark and Catherine and Martha and Mr. Smith found her, and now they're trying to get her back. But just as Mr. Smith was about to get the talisman from the crazy mom, um, Mark and Catherine and Martha tripped on the hallway rug, slipped, and fell into the drawing room. And now it's going to be a little bit harder, I think, for them to be able to get her. So, oh, I am afraid they are very rude children, said the lady, recovering from her surprise. She looked at Mark and Catherine and Martha sternly. In this house, we don't walk in the front door without being asked. I think you had better go home at once. Iphigenia doesn't want to see you. Oh, yes, she does. If she only knew it, said Mark bravely, advancing into the room. Let me take that charm a minute and I'll prove it. It belongs to us anyway. If you mean this rare old Sanskrit talisman, said the lady, it certainly does not. It belongs to my Iphigenia. She's not yours, she's ours, said Martha, getting up from the floor. Her name isn't what you said. It's Jane, said Catherine. She doesn't live here. She lives over on Maplewood, said Mark. Not another word, said the lady. Such awful fibbing I never heard. You are either the worst brought-up children I have ever seen, or you are all mentally unbalanced. I'm afraid I shall have to telephone your parents. No, don't do that, said Mr. Smith, coming forward anxiously. I'm afraid this is all my fault. I'm afraid I asked these children to come. Just a little experiment, all part of my method. Then I don't think much of it, said the lady, getting really cross. I don't believe you are a child psychologist at all, or if you are, you shouldn't be allowed to be. I shall write to the Psychology Journal and complain. Very well. You're right. I'm not, said Mr. Smith, giving up. But don't be alarmed. I can explain everything. Only it's a long story. So if you'd just let me have that charm. So that's it, cried the lady. I see it all now. It's a plot. Coming here pretending to be writing a book and all the time trying to steal our art treasures. For shame, taking advantage of these unfortunate children. No, no, said Mr. Smith, becoming agitated. This is all a mistake. That little girl isn't who you think she is at all. You wouldn't like her if you got to know her, you wouldn't like her if you got to know her, put in Catherine earnestly. You would find her a wolf in sheep's clothing. She's my sister, only she has, what do you call them, said Mark. Hallucinations, explained Mr. Smith. We want to take her where they'll be kind to her, said Martha. Jane, come on home out of this cold, slippery house. The remnant of Jane down in the heart of Iphigenia heard Martha's call. She thought how much happier she felt with Mark and Martha and Catherine. Yes, and Mr. Smith, too, than she did with the gray lady. She remembered her own home and her own family and wished she belonged to them again. She yearned to answer Martha, and she made a great effort and forced her way to the surface and started to speak. But before she could, there was an interruption. A thin, gray gentleman appeared in the drawing room. Yarworth, here you are at last, cried the gray lady. This criminal, aided by these delinquent children, was trying to rob our Iphigenia. Oh, dear me, said the gray gentleman, retreating slightly. Are you sure? Don't just stand there, cried the lady. Defend us. What will Iphigenia think of her father? What Iphigenia would have thought of her father will probably never be known, for at that moment, Mr. Smith, having had quite enough of both Iphigenia and her parents, decided to act. I'm sorry to appear rude, madam, but you'll be glad of it afterwards, he said. At least, I hope so. And he snatched the charm from the lady's hand, took a deep breath, and wished that Jane might be twice as much Jane as she ever was. Jane, finding herself suddenly herself again, gave a glad cry and ran, much to the surprise of Mark and Catherine and Martha, straight to Mr. Smith. You were wonderful, she said. Part of me was here all along, hoping you'd save me, and you did. You were wonderful. It was nothing, said Mr. Smith modestly. We told you so, said Mark and Catherine to Jane. They had run to Mr. Smith too, and so had Martha, and now the 5 of them stood united, looking defiantly at the gray lady and the gray gentleman. The lady was blinking her eyes. The gentleman was rubbing his. They looked rather like 2 people who have just awakened from a nightmare. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Demanded the gray lady. What are you doing in our house? Go away at once. This isn't your little girl, then? asked Mr. Smith with his arm around Jane. The lady looked at Jane with distaste. I never saw the horrid little thing before in my life. You don't even have a little girl, perhaps? Went on Mr. Smith. Certainly not, the lady said thankfully. So noisy and tiresome and such a strain. Then if we take her away with us, it will be quite all right with you? If you don't all leave this house at once, my husband will take steps. Won't you, Yarworth? Said the gray lady. The gray gentleman took a step backwards in alarm. He did not reply. Thank you, madam. That's all I wanted to know, said Mr. Smith, and bowing politely, he touched the charm and made another wish. Of course, if he had asked the 4 children's advice, they could have told him how to word his second wish much better. As it was, being new to magic, he didn't put in any of the things experience had taught them, like not being gone too long and arriving back in a normal way and their mothers not noticing anything out of the ordinary. He just wished they were twice as far as home again. And so, a split second later, when the children's mother came into the living room and it was empty, and then suddenly Mr. Smith and the 4 children were all sitting around in chairs, she was more than a bit surprised. How funny, she said. I didn't see you sitting there. I didn't hear a car drive up either. She glanced out of the window, and it was then that Mr. Smith remembered that his car was still sitting back on Virginia Street, where he'd parked it what seemed like ages ago. He touched the charm in his pocket and made a quick wish, but not quick enough. When the children's mother looked from the window, first she saw the empty street, then suddenly the car was there. She put her hand to her head and sat down suddenly. I really must go to the doctor about my eyes, she said. I keep thinking I see the strangest things. It's the sun, said Mr. Smith. It's awfully strong today. I've been thinking I saw some awfully strange things this morning, too. Over on Virginia Street, said Mark daringly with a wink at Mr. Smith and Jane. Martha giggled. Luncheon is served, said Miss Bick sourly from the doorway, and they all trooped in to where the festive board groaned. The luncheon party was a great success with the 4 children, but their mother seemed a bit worried and preoccupied and kept putting her hand to her forehead as if she were trying to puzzle something out. The spirits of the children were so very high. Oh, no, sorry. Let me backtrack. I got too far ahead of myself. I got my hand in my way. Okay, sorry. Okay. The luncheon party was a great success with the 4 children, but their mother seemed a bit worried and preoccupied and kept putting her hand to her forehead as if she were trying to puzzle something out. And this seemed to make Mr. Smith a bit worried too. The spirits of the children were so very high, however, that their mother couldn't stay upset for long. And the behavior of Jane in particular was enough to warm any mother's faltering heart. She was so unselfish about second helping, so eager to pass things without being asked, so tireless in her efforts not to accept the last extra butterscotch tart lying luscious under its whipped cream, but to bestow it on a friend or relation, so anxious generally to show how much she loved this family above all others, that no one could believe it was the usual good old hasty, hot-tempered Jane who sat there among them. That charm certainly does improve people once they've been through the mill of it, Catherine whispered to Mark. Whisperers at the table shall breakfast in the stable, said their mother. Kath was only saying Jane was certainly full of charm this morning, said Mark with another daring wink at the others. Yes, you'd almost think she were a different person, said Catherine, equally daring. Martha giggled. So, I regret to say, did Mr. Smith. What's the joke? Said the children's mother. Oh, nothing, said the 4 children. I'm just feeling happy, said Mr. Smith. This is a treat for me. I live all alone, and it's years since I've been to a family party like this. Jane looked round the room at the colored pictures on the lemon yellow walls and the gay printed curtains at the window and the bright rugs on the floor and the smiling faces around the table. This is a wonderful family to belong to, she said. It's the best family to belong to in the whole world. Then she smiled at Mr. Smith. I think you're going to think so too, she said. We're at the end of the chapter, chapter 7, How It Ended. Oh man, we're almost done with our book. We're going to find out how it ended tomorrow. Well, at least part of how it ended tomorrow. All right, well, stay tuned. We'll find out what else happens. Have a great day. Love you. See you soon. Bye.